Hello and welcome to this session where our panel is going to suggest 3 supply chain and DC cost-saving strategies to apply in these turbulent times. My name is Michael Levins and I'm Group Editorial Director for Peerless Media Supply Chain Group, which of course includes Logistics Management Magazine, and I'll be your moderator for today's session that's being brought to you by Canon Business Process Services. Now, as if double-digit e-commerce growth and mounting order fulfillment complications and a shrinking labor pool weren't pressure enough, now we add COVID-19 to the list of complications. Now, business leaders in all industries are being challenged in this COVID-19 economic environment, with stores and offices mostly closed and consumers shifting behavior to buy online. Now, these rapid structural shifts to e-commerce, telecommuting, and the digital economy have put a tremendous strain on warehouses, distribution centers, and the overall supply chain. And everybody on the line today is feeling that. Well, today, our panel is going to cover 3 strategies that will help operations find cost savings and gain efficiencies that can enable your business to work smarter during these most challenging of times. Now, to take us on this journey today, we're joined by Joe Tegg, and Joe is Director of Canon Business Process Services. We're also joined by James Flora, and James is an SME, a warehouse and distribution for Canon Business Process Services, and Jeremy Wisdom is also an SME, and he oversees the warehouse and distribution stuff for Canon Business Process Services. Now, just a quick reminder that our panel will be fielding questions in a Q&A session following their presentation today. So please make sure to submit your questions, and we'll get to as many as we can while we're on the line today. Now, if we don't get to all your questions, they're certainly going to be moved over to our panel, and the guys will be able to respond via email. So, Joe, I believe you're going to kick it off for us today by giving us the agenda and getting us started.
Thank you, Michael. My name is Joe Tegg, Director of Business Applications for Canon. Our warehouse team is pleased to present to the audience today our 3 cost-saving strategies in turbulent times. Our agenda today is as follows. Canon, who we are, right-sizing your workforce and assessing current processes to improve productivity, reevaluating inventory levels and facility design to meet customer demand and hold down cost, reassessing vendors to uncover savings, how Canon can help your warehouse operation, and we'll finish up with a very nice Q&A, a lot of good questions we expect coming in today. So who is Canon? Canon is a global $36 billion company. Canon USA is headquartered in Melville, New York, and Canon Business Process Services is a BPO subsidiary of Canon USA, and our corporate offices are located in New York City. We have over 500 client sites and 4,000 employee professionals, and we operate in the U.S., Canada, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Europe. Now let's get started with our presentation on 3 cost-saving strategies in turbulent times. To lead us off, I'd like to introduce James Flora, our subject matter expert on warehouse and distribution services, to discuss right-sizing your workforce and assessing current processes. James?
Thank you, Joe. This is James Flora, and I'm going to jump into our first cost-saving strategy, which is right-sizing your workforce and assessing current processes. As most logistics professionals already know, labor is one of the largest costs in a supply chain. Customers' demands change over time, and it is critical to respond appropriately with your labor model. This could mean increases, decreases, or simply adjusting employees' responsibilities within the department or company. Before any staffing decisions can be made, it is important to validate where recent business changes have actually impacted your staffing requirements. If you are using a labor management system or your warehouse software has volume and performance data readily available, this analysis can be pretty straightforward. If your software doesn't track this, you can start by manually capturing the daily volume and employee hours of each position to establish the baseline. Once this data is available to you, you will be able to make strategic decisions on how to adjust headcount. Overtime is a great option for managers when needed, but can also become a major expense for a company if it's not managed appropriately. A few warning signs that may indicate overtime usage has become the new standard operating model include if overtime has been used consistently for months on end, if there is no real approval process for working overtime, or finally, if the collective hours of overtime for all employees make up more than an additional full-time employee schedule. Using overtime to cover for unexpected employee absences or to handle a spike in volume is appropriate. But even in these scenarios, it may be worth digging deeper to solve the root cause of the issue that is causing the overtime. For example, if your schedule has spikes in volume, you could work with your customers to gain more upfront visibility or even create systems that help level out your schedule. Cross-training can be a fantastic way to reduce labor costs by adding more flexibility to your operation. But before building a cross-training program, it is important to understand where the cross-training is truly needed. A little hint, it is usually where you see the overtime or missed KPIs. It's also important to understand the career path that each of your employees want for themselves. Driving a forklift might be a great skill for one employee to strive towards, yet another employee would rather learn inventory analytics. These skills are very different, but are both in high demand. A manager who can successfully blend what the business needs and the employees want will have great success in their cross-training program. Once you have the right amount of people staffed for each position, you can do a process assessment that will dive into the actual work that makes up each position. In this exercise, we're aiming to remove the non-value-added tasks. An easy way to differentiate what is value-added from non-value-added is to think, would my customer happily pay for this function if I listed it on an itemized invoice? For example, most customers would agree that picking parts for an order is a value-added function of a warehouse. But if you had to search for a lost part and that slowed your process down, you would not want to list search time on an invoice. This would be an opportunity to improve your inventory accuracy and therefore remove the non-value-added search time in your picking process. Other common examples of non-value-added time are using ineffective tools or equipment, having excessive travel time or motion built into your process, or having delays between process handoffs. These types of non-value-added tasks are often easy to fix, and by doing so, you will alleviate employee frustration and at the same time reduce costs to the company. To stay competitive in an evolving industry, it is imperative to continuously improve processes. This can be done through new technology and major operational changes, but the majority of improvements should actually occur as small, incremental process changes. By building a culture that questions the status quo and constantly thrives to be better, you will gain a consistent flow of great ideas from the people who do the processes and know them best. But be sure to allow time to make the changes that are identified. This could be scheduling 5 minutes to label a commonly misplaced tool, or it could be several days dedicated towards redesigning a work cell for greater efficiency. Regardless of the change made, following the change, it is important to update the written process that is used for future training and process consistency. Keeping processes up to date is really only half of the battle. A system will also need to be put in place to ensure that the processes are consistently followed. The easiest way is for management to spend time on the floor engaging with employees who do the processes. When doing this, it will be helpful if the manager has a printed copy of the latest process for reference. This is a good opportunity for management to check in with the employee and ask if they have any best practices or ideas that could help improve the process. This is also the time to provide candid feedback if the employee forgot a required step in the process. But simply showing the employee that process adherence is important to the manager will go a long way. One major motivator of process control is the need for consistent and accurate output. The cost of poor quality is the measurement of all costs that result from defects, which are typically caused by process deviation. This adds up to be much more than just the defective product that is scrapped. It also includes the time that went into making the replacement item, and most importantly, how a defective part or a missed order can impact a customer relationship. This common manufacturing metric is also important to track in distribution centers because mispicked orders or improperly labeled shipments can have a major impact to supply chain costs. Depending on your industry or operation, returnable dunnage could be incredibly common or virtually non-existent. Regardless of how mature your returnable dunnage program is, a good place to start is with the packaging material that you are currently throwing away. Ask yourself, should this be reused? Or could a reusable packaging material work instead of what I'm currently throwing away? And finally ask, who pays for this packaging material? But the reality is that if it's in your possession, your company has likely paid for it one way or another. Working out a dunnage return system with suppliers or vendors is undoubtedly a large-scale project, but it has the opportunity to save a fortune. And because these types of savings can be shared with your vendors and customers, these projects can gain traction quickly and produce savings that give your entire supply chain a competitive advantage.
Great. Thank you, James. My name is Jeremy Wisdom, and over the next few minutes, I want to discuss some of the cost-saving strategies that we can take a look at when we reevaluate and deep dive into inventory levels and facility design. And we all know that facility space and square footage is a significant expense for warehouse operations. So let's just take a look at how we can look at those inventory levels, what those inventory levels consist of, what type of facility design may be best for us and the client, and how we can help reduce the overall cost of that warehouse. And when we talk about the square footage and inventory that's actually in a warehouse facility, some of that inventory is actually safety stock. And by safety stock, we're referring to any additional or extra quantity of an item that's held on hand within that inventory as to reduce the risk of any item running out of stock. It's exactly what it sounds like. That safety stock acts as a buffer in case the sales demands are greater than forecasted or planned, as well as if the company's supplier is unable to deliver additional units at the expected time. So there is a cost associated to all inventory carried, as mentioned, and safety stock is one area where we really need to constantly evaluate where that number needs to be. It's always been an important focus within an operation, but even more so now during the current pandemic. Too much safety stock means the operation may be wasting space and time manufacturing. Too little safety stock and client SLAs can fail. A frequent analysis of lead times, supply chain structures, and sales forecasts must be performed to keep safety stock ratio accurate. And as many companies are finding out now, their safety stock numbers 2 months ago are far different than what is required now. The term work in progress is a production and supply chain management term typically describing partially finished goods that are awaiting completion. Now, ideally, operations typically want to attain more of a just-in-time process so that the production materials are only brought in or used as they are required. With work-in-progress units, this can allow for more bottlenecks and more time, labor-intense order processing. Now, the big focus here is to eliminate waste, any waste of downtime, waste of too much surplus inventory, or waste of overproduction. Typically, a full operational analysis of these work-in-progress goods would be performed with a heavy focus on pinch points and bottlenecks. In addition, we would work with and collaborate with employees to get their input and buy-in, as well as provide any additional needs they may have to help optimize the process, whether that be training and upgrading of personnel and equipment, and a better overall organization structure or process flow. Basically, we don't just want to continue to throw man hours at a problem. We want to do a root cause analysis and improve the project and improve the process flow. Scrap and shrinkage is another important aspect of inventory management. When we talk about scrap and shrinkage, we're referring to any loss of inventory, albeit through damage, waste, missing items, etc. Frequent inventory reporting and documentation of missing or damaged items is crucial to identifying and the reduction of scrap and shrinkage. We want to make sure we identify the reasons for the scrap and or shrinkage, then create processes to minimize that. Performing just-in-time inventory versus bulk production or shipping projects and related discounts can be an important factor to an operation. As mentioned, the just-in-time model is an optimal method of processing orders. However, an organization also has to weigh the potential cost savings of bulk production and shipping. Instead of shipping out multiple orders throughout the week, there can be significant cost savings by consolidating orders and transportation. Obviously, we would want to be in alignment with the customer's SLA requirements to ensure they have product when they need it. Inventory accuracy obviously is crucial to a successful operation. Within inventory management, proper slotting, inventory put away is one of the most important aspects of managing a facility. Just having product on hand is not the same as product availability, and more companies are forced to reorder parts or product due to unavailable on-hand inventory. They know the product is within their facility somewhere, but they don't have the organizational structure to understand where. Facility design is also a very important area where cost savings can be seen. In a warehouse, the name of the game is to make sure you can store as densely as possible while still allowing workers to access the product as much as required. Overall, warehouses are a relationship between the space within that facility and the time spent within that facility. More easily, we can think of whether a warehouse is a space-efficient facility or a labor-efficient facility, and both have pros and cons to them. A labor-efficient warehouse will be one where each individual pallet is readily accessible in either floor locations or single bay racking. Since it's labor efficient, it's easier for workers to pick and replenish these locations. However, the trade-off is you lose some of your space efficiency. By allowing easier access to the product, you're taking up more space around the pallet or storage location. A space-efficient warehouse would be a more densely configured bulk or block storage style facility with pallets that could be stacked 2 or even 3 high. While this storage method does decrease the need for warehouse space, it also can increase the need for warehouse labor or time. For example, if you had a row of 10 pallets stacked 3 high but needed access to the middle pallet, you'd have to move the first 15 or so pallets to get the 1 pallet you needed, clearly using more time and labor. So as you can see, when we are talking about time and space within a warehouse, one typically increases while the other decreases. We mentioned bulk floor storage and elevated racking in the scenario above, each having its pros and cons depending on the type, size, amount of each product. For instance, lower total SKU counts typically can be floor or bulk stored easier than a high amount of SKUs. SKUs by definition are different products and must be separated. The more separation required in bulk floor stacking, the less optimal it is. Elevated racking tends to have product more spaced out, requiring more space than bulk storage. However, each pallet or product is easily separated and more accessible. Vertical storage units, automated storage retrieval units, and carousels are ideal for smaller bin-style products where the facility has capacity up towards the ceiling but limited space on the floor. These styles of units act almost as a vertical vending machine where the operator remains stationary and product is rotated and brought to floor level. While these vertical storage units can certainly increase your space utilization, there is a cost factor to consider for each as well. With increased technology and facility footprints, utility spend is also an important area to address and reduce. Whether that be automatic sensor style lighting, so that lighting energy usage is only applied where an employee or equipment is in a certain area, or insulation specifically near or around overhead doors, or air circulation styles, as well as equipment battery efficiency. Basically, less charging equals less energy used. There are quite a few areas that can be reviewed and reduced with the proper planning.
We're now going to jump into our third and final cost-saving strategy, reassessing vendor charges. Most major companies strategically hire specialized companies and vendors to provide services that are outside of their own core competency. If you oversee a department that has vendor contracts that were signed before you were in your current position, it is critical to track down these contracts and read them. Validate the KPIs and services that were promised in the contracts are being delivered. You may find opportunity for savings through failed KPI penalties that may not have been collected, or you may find other contracts that call out discounts available for early payment. Businesses evolve over time. Processes and expectations change, and with that, contracts often become outdated. Ask your vendors for an itemized bill and spot check the line items that make up your invoice. You may be paying for a service that you no longer need or want to pay for. An example could be if you are paying for a janitorial service to regularly clean an office that has since been transitioned to a storage room. You could cancel this service and reduce your monthly bill. Temporary labor providers are commonly one of the most expensive vendors in a warehouse. You may be able to negotiate your bill rate or get other incentives from your temporary labor providers. Consolidating labor providers or signing a national contract can often provide negotiating power. Other negotiating tactics may be to ask for assistance with labor costs during training or financial contributions towards employee reward systems. We've spoken a lot about labor charges, but the physical items in your facility also have a major cost associated with them. Purchasing teams often carefully inspect the costs of the direct products that go into the company or the products that your company sells. However, the consumable products often don't receive nearly the same attention. Small reductions to the price of a consumable item that is used every day can have a significant impact to the budget over time. An example may be to reduce the size of a label that is placed on each box that is shipped, or adding a smaller and cheaper pallet option so that smaller orders aren't forced to ship on full-size pallets. At the end of the day, it is important to validate that you are getting the best value from every item that you pay for in your operation.
It's imperative to have vetted, reliable brokers and carriers when routing transportation moves, and ensure these carriers are being audited on a continuous basis. Consistent accountability is a big part of managing carriers. Auditing of pricing, on-time performance, services, liability, and insurance coverage per pound of product are all important factors to making sure the carrier selection is the right choice. And when we talk about on-time performance and service, we're not just talking about point of delivery. Service both at pickup location and delivery location are important. So we can't only look at destination on-time performance, but also have to look at origin on-time performance. Any time wasted for waiting on a driver to load a shipment is time paid to someone and ultimately affecting the bottom line. It can be very confusing to calculate your shipping rates based off variables such as commodity, density, class, total miles, and typically your carrier will provide a discount off of their standard rates and can certainly look appealing at face value. This discount can be 60, 70, even 80% off, which typically means more savings, right? Well, not always. However attractive the discounts may look, they can all be relative depending on what pricing model the carrier is applying the discount to. For example, a 70% discount off of 2020 published rates may actually be more expensive to the customer compared to a 65% discount off of another set of non-published or locked-in rates. There are a lot of factors to look at when comparing service and pricing. On top of that, there are FAK provisions that can be negotiated so different items can all be rated at the same class in what's called freight all kinds pricing structure. Shipment rates are based off weight, class, which is density related, miles traveled. So if you can reduce any of those, typically your rate can decrease. If you're able to secure an FAK that allows you to move Class 150 product to Class 70, there's some significant savings for you. As you can see, there's a tremendous amount of due diligence required when it comes to selecting carriers and negotiating pricing. Proper planning and collaboration with production and sales forecasts to help reduce and eliminate expedited shipments is a major area of focus for cost savings. We see a tremendous amount of shipments sent expedited or non-standard ground moves simply because that's what the customer requests. However, many times we can work with the customer to determine a more accurate forecast and timeline of needed product and really begin consolidation of transportation and order fulfillment, ultimately reducing high-cost expedited moves.
Thank you, presenters. Let's talk about some key takeaways from today's 3 cost-saving strategies: importance, urgency, next steps, and who can help. Today, costs are more important than ever. The team has walked you through many different things today that can be implemented and looked at to try to save some savings throughout your warehouse operation. It's important to get started on these cost savings initiatives immediately. Ready to act can put your company's supply chain and financial budgets at risk. Dedicate time specifically towards improvement. Time is of the essence. Get the right people involved. Assign an effort and benefit rating to each initiative and use those to prioritize your actions. And use resources like continuous improvement managers, Six Sigma black belts, strategic sourcing personnel. If you work with a managed service provider, they should be able to provide support resources to drive savings. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Michael for some Q&A.
Excellent, excellent, Joe. Thank you so much, guys. Just a great job. Excellent job today, guys, of walking us through the three steps and those three processes. Great stuff. We do have a number of questions, guys, rolling in right now. As I mentioned at the outset, we will definitely get to as many of the questions as we can in the time we have allotted. And so let's see what we got. We got a few coming in here. First question, it looks like for James. And James, in your portion at the outset, at the very beginning of our presentation, a question for James. James, how do I successfully lead a cross-functional cost savings initiative? That's a pretty good question, considering so many folks are on the fence right now and ready to get started. So how do I get this started?
Yeah, that's a great question. If you are involving a larger team, it definitely adds a level of complexity to any sort of cost savings project. I would say that a lot of your success is actually going to be achieved in the pre-work before you start. This includes getting an executive sponsor, pitching this project to somebody who has some pull throughout your organization, and doing your homework. You really want to dive into the data, check the challenges that are going to make this initiative potentially slow down or get canceled. And then get your team together. Once you pick the people that are going to be involved in this, touch base with them. Try to just build that buy-in and the excitement prior to the event. And if you do a lot of that pre-work when you go into your event, you don't want to necessarily solve the problem yourself. It really should be a team effort. So you push people, you guide the team towards the solution, but don't try to steal the thunder or make it a one-man show. And then finally, I just want to remind everybody, these savings can be fun. So keep it a positive attitude. Give credit to people when they do things well, and at the end, celebrate the success with everybody.
Yeah, James, that's a great point. And so many managers try to take too much sort of on their backs and really run with it, as opposed to, really pushing those different parts of any kind of initiative down, and helping folks, understand that they have to concentrate on the parts of the business where they do best, right? So that's a terrific advice. And here's another question rolled in here for you, James, and actually kind of really nicely ties into this one. Is another question for James. James, how do I reduce any negative impact to our culture, right? So you kind of approach that very nicely, but I can see that, right? You start pushing a new cost savings initiative through. You're kind of riding in on it like a knight in shining armor, but yet, and if you don't pull all these other folks in, right, there could have a negative impact, right? How do you reduce it? What are some of those tips?
Sure. Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question. Cost savings initiatives, sometimes it gets a negative stigma, but it's really what gives your company, an advantage. You do need to manage costs, and, maximize output. But, I guess the big thing that people are scared of is reducing headcount. If it is identified that you're operating at a higher headcount than is ideal for your current demand, one thing that you should really highly consider is how long would it take to right-size this naturally through attrition, right? People will move, people will retire. So if you can put off those layoffs and just kind of wait a month or two, that's going to really protect your culture. And it's not always labor. I guess if it were a quality, a speed, or material spend target, a good approach would be to make the savings a competition. This could be something like the longest team without an error, or maybe the team that has the highest productivity. So those types of competitions can really make it fun. They can boost employee morale while achieving your cost savings.
Right, especially these days, right, when we're, even though we have entered this really odd period of this rapid unemployment, but yet at the same time, when we entered into this period, there was a massive labor shortage, right, and that's going to continue to be one of our key messages we need to send across all of our publications and the work you guys do is, how do we maintain that labor force we have, and that's great. Like it's sort of like a gamification almost, as you suggested. That's a really terrific idea. So we have a couple more questions rolling in here before we come up against our time. A couple questions here for Jeremy, actually, that are rolling in. And Jeremy, I like the fact that you did touch on some of the transportation strategy. And here's a question for you. Question for Jeremy. How do I develop a shipment consolidation strategy in this time?
No, that's a great question, and what I'll do is I'll back up a little bit prior to answering that directly, and a lot of us out there may understand that we need a consolidated effort in some of our shipping, and some of us may not understand that, and what we want to look for is some of the warnings or red flags, and typically anytime you've got a specific client or a specific product that is 80% to 100% expedited, that's a red flag. That's something we really want to look at and say, hey, something's not right within the supply chain here, and how do we consolidate this? So once we have an understanding that we need that, many times we need to drill down into the client's needs. We need to get a better understanding of what product is truly needed and when that product is needed. So there's exactly. a major collaboration effort internally between purchasing, sales, operation, again, both internally as well as with the customers as well. So what we're trying to do, obviously, is align the needs of that customer as well as the ability of the suppliers, the production, and the warehouse operations. So there's typically a sweet spot in production and operations for the most optimal order consolidation for that operation. So that could be a production run of 22 to 40 pallets or whatever that is. And speak with your customer. You need to get an in-depth understanding of what their true delivery needs are, what day of the week they need the product on. For example, if existing orders are being processed as expedited overnight orders, but the client only really needs X amount of product each Thursday, then let's take a look at a consolidated shipment build that could be built each week and shipped using the appropriate ground lead time, so the customer still gets the product well ahead of time when they needed that. So
Right. No, that's great advice. We've done a couple case studies where we saw some real eye-opening numbers where folks just sat back, took a look at exactly what they needed finally, and said, hey, you know what? If you really only need it at this particular time, let's ship it to you then. It's like sometimes folks get so used to that next day in their own personal life for that consumer, right? And that trickles down to their business processes, and it doesn't make sense in a lot of the cases. That's great stuff. So really starting from the beginning and taking a look at exactly who needs what, when, and where, and really being thorough with that. That's great advice. So a couple more questions, guys, that we'll keep rolling in here. And again, we're going to get to as many questions as we can today. We have quite a few that are rolling in. If we don't get to your question, we're going to wrap it all up and move it over to our speakers today. Jeremy, one more question for you here. A question for Jeremy. How can I improve my storage design and get approval for those changes? Another excellent question.
Definitely. So as James mentioned, a lot of this improvement can be fun, and this is one of those questions and one of those challenges that's fun to someone like us that have been in the industry for years. I mean, this is really something that's exciting when we can look at an operation, really do a detailed analysis of your product velocity, your product flow through the warehouse, and really go back to that space and time relationship. Where do we need to be in that relationship between optimizing space and optimizing time spent pulling or replenishing product? So obviously, we'd want to look at product cube. We'd want to look at if current storage methods are maximizing space utilization. For example, do we have all pallet racking? And are we using that for some of our smaller product that could be condensed down to bins to take up a little less footprint?
Right.
Likely, we would need to incorporate FIFO picking methodology, so we need to account for that and replenishments that support that. We need to take into account: are we limited on space? Is there a need of more space-efficient storage solutions, such as mentioned before, bulk floor stacking? Or do we need to go towards a more labor-efficient storage solution, which is racking or floor picks? And again, there's a tremendous amount of data that we'd go through. We'd want to collect that data, do a detailed time study of what that existing product, picking and put away versus proposed solution time would be, and take a look at that change in space utilization along with that change in product processing time, assign that a value, then you have a true ROI created to be able to present for approval.
Yep, absolutely. More great advice, Jeremy. Terrific stuff. Well, guys, we're up against the clock right now. I just want to thank all of you guys. Just a great job today, Joe, Jeremy, and James, for running through this just terrific strategies to apply in these turbulent times, especially the cost-saving side inside your operations. And I really love touching on that transportation stuff too. It's also so important and often so overlooked in these days. So, Joe, Jeremy, James, gentlemen, great job, and we also want to thank everybody for attending today. And again, we have packaged up all those questions that we just couldn't get to today. We're going to move those over to Joe, Jeremy, and James, and the guys will be able to answer your questions via email. Well, gentlemen, thanks again. Terrific job today.